Okay, good evening everyone. Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Haboim. It's already Chodesh Elul, so we're going to have a special shir today on Chodesh Elul, experience Chodesh Elul with one of the great disseminators of Musar and the Musar movement, Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh. The shiurim on Sefer Devarim, sponsored by Dr. Zakaim and Mishpachte, Elul Nishmas of Shom Eliezer ben Rabbi Yaakov Zakaim, Elul Nishmas Rivka Bas Tavi Halevi, and Rab David ben Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi HaKohen, Began Eden Teimenu Chasam. The shiurim on Devarim are also sponsored by my dear friend Rabbi Isaac Yasolovsky, Zechus Refuah Shalema, for Yafa, Malka Esther, Bas Leah, Shav Refuah Shalema, B'soich Shar Chalei Yisrael. Tonight's shir is sponsored Le'iloi Nishmas Reb Shraga Feivel Ben Moshe Reb Shraga Feivel Mendelovich, whose yahrzeit is Gimel Elul, one of the great builders of Torah in the United States of America. Tonight's shir is also dedicated as a chus for Shalema for Malka Bas Dina. She should have for Shalema B'saich Shar Chalei Yisrael. Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh is one of my all-time favorite personalities. There are a few reasons for that. One reason is when I was a bacher, I spent a lot of time learning the Sfarim of Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh, Sefer Shari'ar. Shari'ar is Rabbi Itzeleh's, presents the ideology of the importance of learning Musar and the rationale of learning Musar and how Musar works. And I had a very dear Rebbe who would learn it with us, Rav Eliyahu Meza. He learned with us Sefer Shari'ar. Also Sefer Koich Vayar. Sefer Koich Vayar are the drashos of Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh based on many of the great principles of Musar. There's also a biography that Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh wrote about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter called Nesivoisar. And then Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh compiled the letters of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter called Ar Yisrael. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was the founder of the Musar movement, but Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh was the main disseminator of the ideology of Musar. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter had three main Talmidim. One was the Alter of Kelm, Rav Simcha Zisel Ziv. One was Rav Naftali Amsterdam, and one was Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh. Rabbi Yisrael would say about Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh, he's the Lamdin, meaning they all excelled in many qualities, but he had the greatest Talmudic mind. Just by way of example, Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh, his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer, but he became the rabbi in St. Petersburg, which was an extremely wealthy and cosmopolitan city. He became the chief rabbi of St. Petersburg when it was the capital of Russia at 25 years old. Okay, that's like becoming the chief rabbi of Israel at 25 years old. It was a very eminent position, and here is where the story begins. I want to share with you a lot of biographical information about Rabbi Itzeleh. We've spoken out many of his from the Sefer Shari'ar over the years, from the Sefer Koich Vayar, but I want to give you some biographical information. This comes from the 5-volume set called Tenuais HaMusar, the Musar movement. So, if you were in our shul on Sunday, we spoke about the message of the shofar. You know, we blow the shofar in Chodesh Elul, and Rabbi Yisrael Salanter taught the main message of the shofar is to learn Sifrei Musar. Okay, now Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh became the Rav in. Now, you know, by the way, it's very interesting. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter encouraged all his Talmidim to go into Rabbanos, although Rabbi Yisrael Salanter never really assumed official rabbinic capacity. He felt it wasn't for him, but he did advise his students to go into Rabbanos. And Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh, by the way, everything I'm saying tonight comes from the Sefer Tenuais HaMusar. It's all on your sheet in very small words. And Rabbi Itzeleh was the Rav of this very prestigious and wealthy city, and in this capacity he received a very substantial salary. Okay, as you can imagine, there are shuls in America, even Orthodox shuls, that have very big memberships, and the rabbis receive hefty salaries. There are shuls like that. And it was no different. He was the chief rabbi of St. Petersburg, but he did not feel satisfied. He did not feel content with this position. He didn't feel that it gave him proper spiritual environment. He had a lot of interruptions. In other words, his responsibilities really interrupted his learning. He didn't like the kavod. Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh was one of the all-time great Anovim, and he served in this capacity for 16 years, and then he stepped down. Now, most rabbis will never step down. Once you taste the stage, it's hard to get off. That's human nature. Human nature is, it is difficult for a rabbi to step down. Rabbis never retire. They become rabbi emeritus, honorary rabbi. Lots of luck getting a rabbi to retire. But Rabbi Itzeleh stepped down. Why didn't he like the job? It seems like one of the primary reasons he didn't like the job is because he had to deal extensively with divorces. In St. Petersburg, there were many divorces, and it was very difficult for him to ascertain the halachic spelling of many of the names, because many of the people were very secularized. Many of them were abandoned the religion, and often Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh would have to go into Catholic or Christian buildings or events in order to secure a get from a Jew who converted to Catholicism. And it really bothered Rabbi Itzeleh that he had to, so to speak, dirty himself, sully himself, go into these places to secure a get for a Jewish woman. And Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh wasn't sure what to do, and he went to ask the advice of his holy Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He said, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, you always talk about the value of being mezakes harabim and harbatzas Torah, and that is something that this job provides me. On the other hand, he outlined all the pitfalls. He asked Rabbi Yisrael what to do. Rabbi Yisrael did not give him an answer. After Rabbi Itzeleh on his own decided to step down, Rabbi Yisrael told him he made the right decision. Rabbi Yisrael said, I am so pleased, I am so delighted how great you have risen, how high you have built yourself to stand up to this challenge, to give up the kavod of the job, to give up the salary of the job, in order to leave the glamour of the position to try to lead a more modest and spiritual type of life. We had a similar comment on that the Chidah writes about the Pri Chadash, when the Pri Chadash was offered to be the rabbi in Amsterdam, which was the most prestigious job at the time. And the Pri Chadash had a conversation with the board, and the board said, listen, you'll be the rabbi, you'll sit up front, you'll give nice talks, you'll look good up there, and we'll do our thing and you do your thing. And the Pri Chadash said, no, you just want a puppet, you just want someone to stand there, but you'll be pulling the strings, thanks but no thanks. The Chidah writes about the Pri Chadash, Ashrei Ashra ba'olam hazeh u'ba'olam haba. He did the right thing. He left Amsterdam and he went to Eretz Yisrael. And this is something that repeated itself in other opportunities for Rabbi Itzeleh. He had other prestigious rabbinic offers that he turned down. Ultimately, by the way, he moves to Eretz Yisrael. He made Aliyah. In the picture that I made for you, Rabbi Itzeleh posed very nicely for me. No, this is an old picture. You know where this picture was taken? The original picture, you could look it up, is very available. It's a famous picture of Itzeleh Peterburgh in walking up the street in right outside of the old city, Rehov Strauss. You know what that is? Rehov Strauss. This was where all the Balei Musar lived. I think Reb Simcha Zisel Broidel, Rosh Yeshiva Chevron, was born here. I had the zechus to speak in the yeshiva there, which is built where Reb Itzeleh lived. Underneath this, the staircase is like a secret underground bomb shelter, is where they used to go to learn Musar, in solitude. This is a picture of Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh. Now, so here's what happened. Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh, he turns down the position in St. Petersburg, and after the Petira of the Alter of Kelm, Reb Simcha Zisel Ziv, so Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh was invited to, so to speak, take over the job in Kelm. So he didn't become the official head of Kelm, but in 1898, 1899, 1900, Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh would come to Kelm for Elul, for Yom Naram, and he would give some of his classic drushos of Musar in his fiery and enthusiastic way. Now, Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh lived to disseminate the importance of Musar, and therefore he wanted to go and to visit and to travel to the most important yeshiva of the time to convince the Rosh Yeshiva to learn Musar. The mother of all yeshivas is Volozhin. Volozhin is the mother of all yeshivas. The Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin at the time was none other than Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who's known as, the father of the methodology of learning in the world of yeshivas today. Reb Chaim is like the founder of that methodology. So Reb Itzeleh went to try to persuade Reb Chaim Brisker to institute Musar in all of the yeshivas. So Reb Itzeleh got into a whole conversation, let's call it, or maybe a debate with Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. Reb Itzeleh presented the following Gemara in Brachos: La'olam yargiz adam yetzer tov al yetzer hara. You need to give victory. You need to quake the yetzer tov over the yetzer hara. You can't just try to do mitzvahs in a lackadaisical way. You need to energize. You need to arouse the power of the Yetzer Tov over the Yetzer Hara. If you're successful, great. Otherwise, if you feel the Yetzer Hara is getting the better of you, you need to give it some medication by learning Torah. If that works, great. If that doesn't work, say Shema. If that works, great. If that doesn't work, think about the day of death. Yasker lo yom hamisa. Says Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh to Reb Chaim Brisker, don't you see from here that Torah is not always enough? It's not enough just to sit and learn Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos. Sometimes you need more targeted medication. Sometimes you need to say Kriya Shema. Sometimes you need to remember the day of death. In other words, his point being that it's not enough to learn Baba Kama above Metzia. Sometimes you need to get like a specific targeted dose of those topics that address and are able to fight the Yetzer Hara head on. So Reb Chaim said, let me give you a mashal. I don't like your example. Let's say Reb Chaim said, what's a very strong antibiotic that really tastes bad? Amoxicillin. Strong, one that works. What's
Cipro.
Cipro. One of these thick syrups. In the 70 days ago, one of these thick syrups that really taste terrible, and you have somebody who has a stomach ache. You give him this thick syrup, and somehow this thick syrup cures his stomach ache. But if you give this thick syrup to a healthy guy, it's going to kill him. He's going to be sick to his stomach. So medication is good if you're sick. If you're healthy, medication is bad. So too says Reb Chaim. If you're sick, if you're spiritually ill, you need to think about worms consuming you after 120. But if you're spiritually healthy and you spend your day thinking about the day of death, you're going to be a basket case. This is not a healthy program of Judaism to be thinking about these very serious and sullen topics. So Reb Chaim says Musar is good if you're spiritually ill, but we who are immersed in Torah, we're immersed in learning, it's like we're exercising, we're taking multivitamins, we're healthy. So for us to learn Musar, it's counterproductive. However, Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh rejected the argument of Reb Chaim. Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh says, I have a question for you. The Gemara says in Erevin, Chash b'roisha yasek b'Torah. If you have a headache, you should learn Torah. You do that? You know anyone who does that? Imagine if your kid said, Dad, I have a headache. Yeah, okay, good. Go learn Shor Shenagach Esapara. It's child abuse, you got to take Advil. So nobody follows that recommendation. If you have a headache, you should learn Torah. They go to a doctor. So if somebody's spiritually ill, don't just take him to the base medrash. You have to take spiritual medication. And Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh said spiritual medication was limud hamusar. Okay, I want to share with you Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh's approach to learning Torah. To learning Torah lishma. He had a very special perspective on learning Torah. While he was engaged in learning a sugya of Gemara, he would explain to himself, okay, this halacha, this lamdos, this svara in the Gemara, this is what Hashem wants. This is das Hashem. And when he would get to a machlokes between different Tanoim or Amoraim, he would say, this Tana holds, this is what Hashem wants from us. That Tana holds, that's what Hashem wants for us. In other words, it wasn't an academic study. He would always trace it back that ultimately what we're trying to get to the bottom of is, what does God want us to do? How does Hashem want us to think? How does Hashem want us to act? This is not just some random topic of two people are pulling a talis. Should we divide it? Should we wait until Yoah Navi comes? The question is, what does God want us to do? Okay. Fasten your seatbelts. Now we're going to learn the special protocol and behavior of Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh in the month of Elul and Yom Naram. Because as careful as Rav Itzeleh was in every word he said, as we're going to see, he was so careful during the month of Elul that he would not talk. He did not speak for 40 days. From Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur, he did not speak divrei chayil. Okay? Not only that, he did not live at home. He would leave his house and he would go into solitude at certain designated locations, on a mountain somewhere, in a particular forsaken Beis Medrash. Sometimes he would lock himself up in a certain room, and his Talmidim would come. He would give special musar vadim. So in other words, he would give shiurim. He would give musar vadim, but he did not speak divrei chayil for 40 days every year. Now, what would happen if, something out of the ordinary happened? One time, the Ridvaz. You ever hear of the Ridvaz? The Ridvaz is one of the primary commentaries on the Yerushalmi. He was the Rav of Slutsk, and he came for a pressing need, and Rav Itzeleh said, look, Geder Gadarti v'Yichal Shanas. This is my policy. I don't change it. I can't talk. I don't talk. One time, he had a daughter in Chodesh Elul, and he went to visit his wife, and he told her, Mazal Tov. Yep, he said those two words. That's all he said, because that's not considered speaking, that's a bracha. He would visit her every day, and the communication was pantomime, but he would not talk. Rav Itzeleh did not talk from Rosh Chodesh Elul until, by the way, the Chafetz Chaim brings down in Shmiras HaLashon this famous practice of Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh, who would not talk. Now, one time during Elul, he had to accompany his wife from St. Petersburg to Germany to a doctor. So they meet a very eminent professor. We're going to learn Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh was married for 35 years, and he didn't have children. And even though in those days, if someone's married a certain amount of time, standard protocol was you move on. You have to have children. People would move on. That was normative practice. But he did not want to leave his wife. He stayed with her for 35 years, and only after she suggested that he, so to speak, take another chance, he gave her a lot of money, and he married a young woman. When he was much older, he married a 24-year-old almana who already had 4 children. Okay? This almana was sick. He had to go with her to Germany, and the professor, the doctor, sees this old man with a young, beautiful girl, and the guy's not talking. So he starts to commiserate with her. I feel so bad. It's bad enough you married this old guy, but he's also a mute. And Rav Itzeleh just stood there, and he smiled, he laughed, he didn't say a word. One time, for health reasons, Rav Itzeleh had to go to a coast city for the mineral baths in the Baltic Sea, for health. The water of the Baltic, it's so healthy. Those minerals, it gets into your skin, into your bone. You become a different person. You should try it. You ever go to the Baltic? Really? Okay. The Baltic. I don't think he was able to get to the Baltic is the best. Anyway, the thing is, after you would spend time there,
Hungary they have...
No, Hungary. Hungary, they have good food. I'm talking about mineral baths.
Yeah, they have these where people go.
Yeah? Doesn't compare to the Baltic. No. Marienbad, Carlsbad, Pechani, those are the three main ones. Marienbad, Carlsbad, and Chani. Chassam Sofer used to go there. Chassam Sofer would go to the mineral baths in Marienbad. The Skver Rebbe today still goes to the same mineral baths as the Chassam Sofer. Anyway, but the Baltic is also really good. Baltic is good stuff over there. Anyway, Rav Itzeleh knew that he was going to stay there until the 15th of Elul. But then he wouldn't be able to say goodbye to all his friends in the Baltic. So on Rosh Chodesh Elul, he went over to them, he said, I'm goodbye, Shalom Aleichem, Tzeschem L'Shalom. I'm leaving in 15 days. I'm not going to be able to say goodbye then. So I'm saying goodbye now for 15 days from now when I have to go. One time, when Rav Itzeleh already made Aliyah, he was living in Rehov Strauss, he had to go during Elul to Vienna for some kind of surgery. He was afraid that he was going to have to talk when he got there. So he took 3 Tamei Chachamim and he was mater neder to be able to talk. However, he was successful. He did not have to say even one word on that particular occasion. Now, during the Yimei Elul, Rav Itzeleh gave different kinds of shmuzin. Once a week, he would give divrei hisoros, like a fiery drasha. Once a week, he would give a deep, complex shir and hilchos tshuva based on the Rishonim. When Yom Kippur came, Rav Itzeleh was on a completely different level. He was nirash, the nifgad. He was storming. Now it's very interesting. On Yom Kippur, he would give 4 drashos. The night of Yom Kippur alone, he would give 4 drashos. 1 after Kol Nidrei, 1 right before Shema Koileinu Hashem Elokeinu, 1 before Hashivenu, and 1 before Al Tashlicheinu. And he would talk about the meaning of the words and what we're being mispalo for. And then after he finished the drasha, everyone in unison would say that pasuk, and it was a very moving experience. Interestingly, with all the great fear and awe that Rav Itzeleh displayed throughout the Yom Naram, when Sukkot came, he turned into a different person. So when Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh lived in Kovna, the Bnei HaYeshivos and the Koilim would come and greet Rav Itzeleh on the Yom Tif, and they would come on the Simchas Beis HaSha'eva, and they would sing with him, and Rav Itzeleh would sing special Nagunim, and he would give Divrei Torah. And interestingly, because Rav Itzeleh hosted these great events, so a lot of the Talmidim started to sing songs that, you honor tzaddikim. Nowadays when a Talmid Chacham comes in, they Yamim Al Yemei. So back then, or you know what else they sing nowadays? It's a big one. Tzaddik Tzaddik Atam Ar Yifrach Yerez Avanan Yizkeh. You know this song? Yes or no? You know it? Yeah. Shesulim V'Veis Hashem. What? No, there's a special nigan. Anyway, and people were surprised that Rav Itzeleh, who was always running away from kavod, let the Talmidim sing him these songs. He was always nauseated almost by honor and recognition. And people asked him, why do you let the Talmidim honor you like this? So he said over the famous Shita of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, which is Noigea Tamidos. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, there is no Isser of Lifnei Iver Loisitein Michshal on Midos. In other words, let's say you compliment someone, and by you complimenting them, they're going to feel gaiva. So maybe you're not allowed to give a compliment. Yeah, I know a lot of people like that. They're very, very hesitant to give compliments because they're afraid maybe the person will feel gaiva. I know people, they criticize. Why? Because they're trying to help the other person feel humble. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said there's no Isser of Lifnei Iver on Midos. Your job is to flatter the guy. So the guy's head should be going through the clouds. The fact that he's a bad guy, that's his problem, not your. You're not to cause a guy to sin, but to cause someone to be arrogant, that there's no Lifnei Iver on that. That's why, I don't like by a fast day, people go around, have a meaningful fast. Get lost. You telling me to have a meaningful fast? None of your business whether I have a meaningful fast. You tell me to have an easy fast. As far as you're concerned, I should have an easy fast. You, pal, you go have a meaningful fast. You tell me to have an easy fast. When I was a kid, there's no such thing, have a meaningful fast. Get lost. None of your business whether I have a meaningful fast or not. All of a sudden, have a meaning. Now, your job is to make sure the guy feels good. If he takes advantage of the day, that's his geschäft. That's his business. Anyway, that comes from the Bali Musar. It's not your business whether someone has a meaningful fast. Your job is make sure he has an easy fast. Okay. This is a little bit of a hakdama of the Derech HaMusar of Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh. But now I want to bring you into some of the regular practices of Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh. We have a record of 13 Kabbalahs that Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh had. These are like practices that he adopted really throughout his lifetime. And it's really amazing to see what these practices were. Number one, regarding speaking. Rabbi Itzeleh took a Kabbalah on your sheets. It's number 4. Rabbi Itzeleh took a Kabbalah to be nizhar b'li neder from all dvarim asurim, all dvarim heterim, only if it's absolutely necessary, or it's a way of showing chesed to someone, to be very strict when it comes to avak lashon hara. Basically, Rabbi Itzeleh adopted the general practice of bedidus, solitude. By the way, I just saw this past Shabbos, the biggest sponsor, I don't know if they're actually going to do this, but it was interesting to see that the Israeli government, they wanted to spend millions of dollars so that tens of thousands of people could go to Uman on Rosh Hashanah. Why the Israeli government wants to fund tens of thousands of people going to Uman? You heard about this? They want people to leave, and they're having them go through Moldova. It's very interesting that the Israeli government now became the biggest advocates of Breslov Chasidus. But we know that one of the hallmark fundamental principles of Breslov is hitbodedut, solitude. But you'd be interested to know that Rabbi Elazar Askiri, the Sefer Charedim, says that somebody who goes into solitude to think about Avodas Hashem and to make a cheshbon hanefesh, that practice alone is mechaper all your averos. The Chida, I just saw this on Shabbos, says, Kesoines bad kodesh yobash. Bad is bedidus, kodesh. It's holiness. Anyway, Rav Itzeleh very much adopted the practice of going into solitude, as did the Chafetz Chaim. And he took upon himself the following acceptance, that the movement of his tongue should be the heaviest limb in his body. He tried to develop the attitude that moving his tongue should be difficult, so that before he would speak, people think, I'm sitting at a wedding, and if there's awkward silence, all of a sudden, right? That's also a new word, awkward silence. What's awkward about it? I'm very comfortable. I don't have to hear noise. Well, I want to hear some story that never happened. So it's quiet is good. No, all of a sudden it's awkward. So Rabbi Itzeleh adopted the principle that moving the tongue should be the heaviest limb of the body. Acceptance number 2, Kabbalah number 2 is tefillah, with supplicative kavana. And also, every birchas hamitzvah should be with great kavana. Every bracha on food should be with great kavana, not to just eject a bracha from one's mouth. Number 3, his third Kabbalah was his diligence in learning. Namely, to always be thinking in words of Torah or words of Musar, even when he would be talking to people. Rav Itzeleh adopted the practice that he could be talking to you and he was thinking and learning. Now, there are many people who could do that. The thing is, they can't talk to you while they do that. They're elsewhere. He would be able to be present and to think and learning. Number 4, love for people. To try every day to do some form of chesed. Number 5, to learn Sifrei Musar, daily. Included in that is to learn daily Shulchan Aruch Arachayim, especially Hilchos Shabbos. Number 6, to constantly review the first sif in Shulchan Aruch, Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, to always put God before you. Number 7, to be careful about Tefillah B'tzibor. You know, in St. Petersburgh, I don't think they had like a minyan fest, like Hachayim HaShalom. You know, where you come 11:30 at night, hot dogs are rolling, there's slurpees, and you can get a minyan at any time. No, they didn't have that kind of thing. They didn't have, you know, with a big screen. Nope, they didn't have minyan factories. So in order to get a minyan, you had to make sure you were there at the desired time. Number 8, to be careful from anger, not to arouse oneself to anger for any reason. Number 9, to be careful not to just let your eyes wander astray, to train yourself to look downward. Number 10, he took upon himself to look at his watch practically every hour. Number 11, I guess to maybe to be menatzel, to take advantage of time, to make sure he's taking advantage properly of time. Number 11, to be careful about bittul Torah, not to go without learning at least something during the day and the night. Number 12, to always learn the Sefer Hayira of Rabbeinu Yoina and Sefer Tomer Devara. And number 13, I'm not quite sure what it is. Number 13, I'll let you try to figure out what Rabbi Peterburgh's 13th Kabbalah was. B'chol dirachecha ha'etzel lazeh she'yia nikba b'leivav k'may kasav b'sefer Magid Mishnah ha'yisi chafetz ma'od. And through these various Kabbalahs, Rabbi Itzeleh really polished and perfected his character, his personality, his midos, in terms of the beneficence, the kindness he showed people, his incredible humility, his ability to remain silent, his tolerance, his carefulness in speech, and his carefulness in the kavod of other people. Now, if you really want to know what somebody's like, the way he acts in shul has no bearing on the way somebody really is. You know, a guy in shul, he could be a great guy. Oh, he's such a great guy. You see him at the kiddush, he's so nice to everybody. He serves everyone kugel, he pours everyone whiskey. But when he gets home, he becomes a chayara. The only way to know what a person's true character is how he interacts with his wife and children. And this is something Rabbi Peterburgh really emphasized, that a person needs to treat their wife no less than the guy who sits next to them in shul. Yeah, that's a big, don't shake your head that you know what I'm talking about. You have no idea what I'm talking about. You need to give your wife as much honor as a random stranger in shul. Whatever you wouldn't say to a random stranger in shul, don't say to your wife. Rav Itzeleh always stressed to be careful not to say something, even the slightest bit, insensitive. And this is something that he fulfilled his whole life. We mentioned that his first wife he was not zocheh to have children with, and even though he suffered greatly, he really desired to create some kind of legacy and perpetuity, but he stayed with her for 35 years, and upon her suggestion, so he divorced her, and he supported her, and she ultimately went to Eretz Yisrael. He married a 24-year-old mother of 4 children. And before he married her, he made certain arrangements with her. He said, number 1, I'm not going to be home for 40 days every year from Rosh Chodesh Elul to Yom Kippur. Number 2, even though he was allowed to leave, he would always ask her mechila, and that he would have to leave her for that time of the year, and it would cause her pain. He gave her, the whole running of the house was under her auspices. Very interesting. If the baby would cry at night, the guy, he's in his 70s. Rabbi Peterburgh is an old man. She's a young girl. He would not let his wife wake up at night. When the baby cried, he would get up. I you know what? Truth is, I would also. I never heard the baby. Anyway, that was one thing I always try to emulate Rav Itzeleh on that one. I just never heard. And he would not let her get up. He would also try to ease her burden. Erev Shabbos, he spent the day helping her in the house. He considered a great mitzvah. One time, Rabbi Yeshaya Chishin saw Rav Itzeleh in Chatzar Strauss. He saw him, there was like a well of water. He was carrying the well. He was carrying a big barrel of water up those big steps by himself. So this Rabbi Yeshaya said, "Can I help you?" Rabbi Itzeleh said, "Why you want to help me?" So he said, "It's a mitzvah to help a rabbi." So Rabbi Itzeleh said, "Okay, I also want to do a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah for me to help my wife." Now, interesting, every Erev Yom Kippur, Rabbi Itzeleh Peterburgh would send a letter to his wife asking her for mechila. Again, he didn't speak, So every Erev Yom Kippur, he would ask her for mechila. He was very dedicated to his stepchildren. He had 3 stepsons and 1 stepdaughter. He actually provided for them more than his own children. When the kids, when they grew up and it was time for them to go to school, he put them on his shoulders and he took them to the cheder. When they became bar mitzvah, he taught them the haftarah. He taught them the drashos. When they were sick, he would sit by their bedside and not move until they recovered. When the daughter, it came time for her to get married, he did not occupy himself with anything other than finding her a zivug. He then was zocheh to have 4 of his own children with this woman. So he has 4 stepchildren and 4 of his own children. He did not give them preferential treatment. Just the opposite. He gave his stepchildren, he treated them better than his own children. Why? So for example, if he bought new clothing, it went to his stepchildren. If he had money, it went to his stepchildren. And he said halachically, he's obligated to do that. Because with his own children, you could do whatever you want. You have no obligation to how to treat the kid, what to give them. You could give them hand-me-downs. But to his stepchildren, he felt he was contractually obligated to care for them. And therefore, he felt he had greater obligation to care. Now, with his own kids, by the way, you ever hear of something called Kriya Shema? You have these, you heard of the Shema prayer that the ancient Hebrews say, and also Orthodox Jews, they also say it today. The thing is, people think that the prayer of the Shema, somehow what you do is you come to shul, whatever time it is, you say the Shema and you're good to go. No, unfortunately today, the minyanim are not at the right time. So for example, on Shabbos morning, you like to daven 9 o'clock, that's great. The thing is, in almost every shul, the 9 o'clock Shachris, you're not saying Shema at the right time. And biblically, not rabbinically, biblically you must say Shema at the right time. So you want to make sure every Shabbos to be aware, what time is the Zman Kriya Shema? You have to know, let's say now I think the later Zman, the Magen Avram Zman is always earlier. Maybe now it's about in the 8:40 range, but the latest Zman, the Gra Zman, it's like 9:30. In most shuls, the Shabbos morning, at 9:45, they're saying Shema. You have to make sure also the same thing Friday night. You say, I come home, it's dark outside. The thing is, you said Shema before 3 stars came out. You must repeat the Shema every morning at the right time. You have to say it, and every night at the right time. So what do you do with a kid? All right, you try to wake up the kid for the Zman Kriya Shema. So Rav Itzeleh, when he would wake up his own kids, he would say, get up. No, I'm so tired. You have to say Shema. But with his stepkids, Yingala. It's almost as Zman Kriya Shema. You want a few more minutes? You want me to wake you up in a few more minutes? You want me to, give you a massage in the meantime? So in other words, Rav Itzeleh was much more tolerant and patient with his stepchildren than with his own kids. With own kids, like, get out of bed already, you got to say Shema. With his stepkids, he said, they don't have a father. They have a din of a yasaim. I have to be very careful how I treat them. He was very careful with his cleaning help. He treated his cleaning help like members of the family. One time they saw Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh. They couldn't find him. He was under the bed. What in the world are you doing under the bed? He's cleaning under his bed. Why are you cleaning? You have a cleaning lady. The cleaning lady should have to get down on the floor because I made a mess under my bed. I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to be matriach someone else to clean up my mess. And also, Rav Itzeleh, before Rosh Chodesh Elul, he would ask mechila from the cleaning help, and if he forgot to do it, he would send her a letter, if she's moichel him. One of the Talmidim of Rav Itzeleh said over that one time his wife, the younger one, who had to go to the professor in Germany, was ill in bed. And she's calling from the kitchen to the cleaning help. You know, Sprinza, did you serve the soup? And Sprinza said, yeah. Did you serve the fish? Yeah. You served the chicken? Yeah. Meanwhile, she's serving peanut butter and jelly. And what did she do with all the food? She packed it up for her to take home to her family. And Rav Itzeleh is there at the table. And he sees how the cleaning lady is scamming his wife. And the reason why she's doing that is because she knows that Rav Itzeleh would never embarrass her. So he's sitting there at the table, eating peanut butter and jelly, watching the cleaning lady pocket all the good food, and he would never breathe a word to his wife. Ad kedei kach, the cleaning lady knew he would never breathe a word, so she was able to pull it off in front of his face. Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh attended every simcha he was invited to. He said it's chesed. The person wants you to be there. He would attend. Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh at a wedding was the life of a party. Here he is. He's in his 70s. He was the life of the party. He was mesameach the chasim v'kala. He would get up on the table and dance with all of the bachrim. When his best friend, Rav Naftali Amsterdam, got married a second time in Yerushalayim, they were both over 70 years old. Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh, he had the moves. Rav Itzeleh was the life of the party. He also excelled in humility. Like the Vilna Gaon, he would sometimes go into Golus and dress like a simpleton and eat leftovers of people's food to try to train himself in humility. Rav Yisrael Salanter would say that he has two great Talmidim, Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh and Rav Naftali Amsterdam. They were both great in humility, but Rav Itzeleh was greater in humility. What was the difference between Rav Itzeleh's humility and Rav Naftali? Rav Naftali was a big anav, but Rav Naftali knew he was an anav. Rav Itzeleh didn't even know he was an anav. Yeah, you hear the difference? You have some people, they're humble, but they know they're humble. They know they're humble. This is probably the most famous story of Rav Itzeleh. One time, a big group of Rabbanim gathered in St. Petersburg. Among them, Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik. Who's that? The Rav of Brisk. So, as the Rabbanim are convening, it was an opportunity for them to talk and learning, and the Beis HaLevi said over a laser sharp, amazing question that his son Reb Chaim had. He said over one answer that he himself thought of, the Beis HaLevi thought of, and one answer that his son Reb Chaim thought of. And all the Gedolim were talking and they were conversing and they were debating, and Rav Itzeleh is sitting there, and people didn't even know if he knew what they were talking about. They thought he's the rabbi of the city, maybe he just knows, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch or something. He didn't have anything to add to this complex conversation. So the Beis HaLevi went home and he was wondering, this is Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh. So he opened up the Shalas HaTshuvos Pri Yitzchak, and sure enough, one of the tshuvos was that very question. The first answer the Beis HaLevi gave, and the second answer that Reb Chaim gave. But Rav Itzeleh did not have the need to let people know how much he knew. One time, by the way, Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh traveled with the Alter of Slobodka to try to promote and disseminate the ideals and the Shita of Musar. And they gathered together with many Rabbanim, and they came to a conversation about a complex halachic topic, and every Rav offered his opinion, and Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh did not say one word. And the Alter Sabatka afterwards says to Rav Itzeleh, this was not a good time to look like a simpleton. If people would know what a great Talmid Chacham you are, your words would carry a lot greater weight. So Rav Itzeleh said, "What? I'm a chassan. I need to show off what I know." That's not how we do it. Not only that, in the years 1896 to 1898, there was great opposition to the Musar movement. One of the leading opponents of the Musar movement was the son of Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, and his name was Rabbi Tzvi Rabinowitz. He was one of the great opponents of the Musar movement. There were many meetings of Rabbanim where the challengers of the Musar movement would, so to speak, lay out all their problems with Musar, what they thought was wrong with it, what they thought was not normative about the Musar movement. And one time, Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh was there, and the various Rabbanim would say all of their issues and all of their accusations and all of their problems, ad kidei kach, that it became so nasty that they started publishing in the newspapers demeaning things about the Balei Musar, including Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh, to the point where they published in the newspaper a question about the financial honesty of Rav Itzeleh, who was one of the Gabaim of a certain tzedakah, and they had the audacity to question his honesty with the funds. And Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector was forced to gather a big meeting and defend the honor of the Balei Musar and what a great audacity is to challenge their ethics in financial matters. But one of the great opponents of Musar was the son of Reb Tzvi Rabinowitz. And at this fateful gathering, where many of the Rabbanan laid it on to Rav Itzeleh, all their problems and all their issues, and they asked him, "No, what do you say about it?" He said, "What do I say? Laila Toiv." And he left. So they said, Rav Itzeleh, you know what they're going to publish in the newspaper tomorrow? That you had nothing to say and that you admit shtika kaida. Rav Itzeleh says that anytime something becomes personal, nothing that you respond makes any difference. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. Once it becomes a personal disagreement, you're always better off just keeping your mouth closed, and that's always the best response, and ultimately that's the strongest response. Rav Itzeleh so greatly rose above personal animosity that when one of his stepchildren needed to get married, he continued his very friendly relations with Rav Tzvi Rabinowitz, the Mamala Makayim of Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan. In fact, in 1896, when Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan passed away and Rav Tzvi Rabinowitz took over the post of his father, Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh was the first Rav to sign on the Ksav Rabbanos of Rav Tzvi Rabinowitz, who was his greatest opponent. And then when his stepson got married, Rav Itzeleh was Machabed Rav Tzvi Rabinowitz to be the Masader Kedushin. So this gives you a little glimpse into the extent that these great Balei Musar worked on themselves in a way that just learning Torah, although learning Torah has a great impact on the Jewish soul, and it elevates a person, and it sanctifies a person, and it does perfect one's midos, but there's a very important polish and a very important levels of midos that can only be accomplished and achieved by specifically working on those characteristics. And you see what a Malach Hashem Rav Itzeleh was in terms of his humility. You know, who would ever invite their opponent to be the Masader Kedushin at their kid's wedding? Who would ever sign a document of honor for somebody who opposed their own viewpoint? You see how he worked almost in a supernatural way to overcome the desire for kavod, how he was able to really adopt the ability to be silent, the midah of shtika. That's a midah. It's not something that comes naturally. The ability to remain silent when there's something you really want to say. That is a midah that needs to be worked on. His ability, can you imagine, he's an old man. Did you know that when something happens at night, when one of the kids get up at night, it's not so easy to get out of bed? You know that? It's not. Most people, did you know that most people, let's say if they wake up in the middle of the night, would rather stay in bed? They did a lot of studies on this. There are a lot of medical studies that when people wake up at night, they'd rather the other person get up, especially if they're much younger. You know, he could have said, my beard is white, I'm almost upstairs, you know, at least let me rest a little bit now. No, so you see how he was so Iber gearbet is the best way to say it. He's so worked over. He's so perfected his rizos and his chesed and his hatava. And he's one of the fathers of the Musar movement and the great disseminator of the ideals of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. And in the month of Elul, so to speak, Rav Itzeleh in a way is synonymous with Chodesh Elul. You know, if there's someone who represents the avodah of Chodesh Elul, it is Rav Itzeleh Peterburgh. So let's end off with what Rav Itzeleh said at that great rabbinic meeting. He ended off with 2 words, Laila Toiv. Have a good night, everyone. Shkayach.
Recording stopped.
A lot of argument with the
Yeah.
maskilim.